Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, my newsletter, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me onto their programs as a technical product accelerator to work alongside their teams to help them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk, while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net. In this episode number 94, we'll be sharing Drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us by Daniel Pink. I've worked in and for many companies, very large and very small, and noticed how the systems that are in place to motivate people don't work. As we get deep into the age of AI, it's more important than ever to know how to keep your team motivated so that they can produce their best results and they'll feel good about their work and feel good about you as a leader. This book is broken into 3 parts, and we're going to cover 2 of them here. Highly recommend buying a copy of the book. It's well worth the read or the listen. The 3rd part especially goes into an awful lot of examples. Part 1, he calls it the new operating system. Part 2, the 3 elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's get started. The book opens with a discussion of 2 experiments that should have fundamentally changed how we understand human motivation. But they didn't, at least not right away. Back in 1949, psychologist Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin conducted a really simple study. He gave rhesus monkeys mechanical puzzles to solve. Nothing fancy, just 3 steps: pull a pin, undo a hook, lift a cover. What happened next, though, was strange. Without any reward or instruction, monkeys became obsessed. They worked with focus and determination, seemingly because they enjoyed it. By day 13, 2/3 could solve them in under 60 seconds. But here's where it gets interesting. The prevailing scientific wisdom said behavior was driven by biological drives: hunger, thirst, reproduction, and by external rewards and punishments. But neither explained what Harlow was seeing. The monkeys received no food, no water, nothing, yet they persisted. Nothing was rewarding them either. Harlow proposed something radical, a 3rd drive. He called it intrinsic motivation, the idea that we do things simply because we find them rewarding in themselves. But when Harlow rewarded the monkeys with raisins for solving the puzzles, their performance got worse. They made more errors and solved fewer puzzles. It was like rolling a ball down a hill, only to watch it float upward. Our understanding of human behavior had fundamental gaps. Harlow urged the scientific community to rethink motivation theory, but then he largely abandoned the research himself. So the idea lingered on the margins for 20 years until Edward Deci picked up the thread. In 1969, Deci, a Carnegie Mellon psychology grad student with an MBA, designed his own puzzle study using the Soma Cube. He divided participants into 2 groups across 3 sessions. Group A received payment for solving configurations in session 2. Group B never received payment. Here's what mattered. The 3rd session, when Group A learned they wouldn't be paid anymore, they spent significantly less time playing with the puzzles, even less than when they first encountered them unpaid. Deci had confirmed Harlow's uncomfortable finding: external rewards could actually undermine intrinsic motivation. When money is used as an external reward for some activity, Deci concluded, the subjects lose intrinsic interest in the activity. Rewards deliver short-term boosts, but can reduce long-term motivation to continue. What Deci discovered launched a lifelong quest to understand why we do what we do, one that challenged assumptions across psychology, business, and beyond. Yet organizations everywhere still haven't caught up. We continue chasing carrots and wielding sticks despite mounting evidence that they often backfire. This book bridges the gap between what science knows and what business actually does. Because if these experiments teach us anything, it's this: our fundamental assumptions about motivation are wrong. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. The question becomes, what are you going to do about it? Part 1, a new operating system. 1. The Rise and Fall of Motivation 2.0. Let's start with a thought experiment that might challenge everything you think you know about how human motivation works. Imagine it's 1996. I'm asking an economist to predict the future using a crystal ball. I present it with two competing encyclopedia projects. The first comes from Microsoft, a powerhouse company with massive resources, professional writers and editors, well-compensated managers, and clear profit motives. The second is created by tens of thousands of unpaid volunteers who contribute their time for free with no financial incentive whatsoever. I ask, which will be more successful by 2011? The economist would laugh. No serious economist would pick volunteer-driven models. The incentives are all wrong. Microsoft stands to gain. The volunteers gain nothing. It would be like asking a zoologist who'd win a foot race between a cheetah and your brother-in-law. But here's what actually happened. On October 31st, 2009, Microsoft shut down MSN and Carter. Wikipedia, that second model, became the largest, most popular encyclopedia in the world. The conventional view of human motivation simply can't explain this. To understand why, let's talk about the concept of operating systems, not for computers, but for society. 50,000 years ago, we operated on Motivation 1.0, your pure biological survival drive. But as societies grew complex, we needed cooperation with strangers, so we upgraded to Motivation 2.0. This new system was based on a simple assumption. Humans respond to carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments. Frederick Winslow Taylor's scientific management in the early 1900s perfectly embodied this approach. Workers were machine parts, reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. The system was elegant, effective, and deeply embedded in how we've organized everything for over a century. But starting in the 1950s, cracks began to show. Abraham Maslow and Douglas McGregor challenged the assumption that humans are merely stimulus-seeking animals. Frederick Herzberg argued that true satisfaction came from intrinsic factors, the work itself, achievement, and growth. W. Edwards Deming insisted that quality came from intrinsic motivation, not bonuses and rankings. These thinkers inspired modest improvements, but the fundamental system remained intact. Now in the 21st century, this old operating system is crashing. Here's the fundamental mismatch he's discovered. We've built our entire motivational system on assumptions about how work gets done that are increasingly obsolete. Consider the distinction between two types of tasks, algorithmic and heuristic. Algorithmic work follows a set script. You're doing the same thing repeatedly with a clear pathway and the right answer is known. Heuristic work is entirely different. You're experimenting, devising novel solutions, creating something new. It's artistic, empathic, non-routine. During the 20th century, most work was algorithmic. But today that's changing dramatically. McKinsey estimates that in the U.S., only 30% of job growth comes from algorithmic work now. 70% comes from heuristic work. This shift creates a profound problem for Motivation 2.0. Harvard researcher Teresa Amabile has found that external rewards and punishments work reasonably well for algorithmic tasks. But for heuristic ones, they can be devastating. When you're tackling novel problems or creating something genuinely new, you're relying on intrinsic motivation. Amabile calls it the intrinsic motivation principle of creativity. Intrinsic motivation is conducive to creativity, while controlling external motivation is detrimental to it. Think about what that means. I'll read that again. Intrinsic motivation is conducive to creativity, while controlling extrinsic motivation is detrimental to it. The central tenets of Motivation 2.0, carrots and sticks, external incentives, may actually impair performance on exactly the kind of work modern economies depend on. As work has become more creative and less routine, it also becomes more inherently enjoyable. One psychologist discovered that people actually report having optimal experiences more often at work than during leisure time. This completely undermines Motivation 2.0's foundational assumption that work isn't inherently enjoyable. In fact, adding certain kinds of extrinsic rewards to inherently interesting tasks often dampens the motivation. Consider vocation vacations, a business where people actually pay money to work at other jobs during their time off. They test drive being chefs, running bike shops, operating animal shelters. They're doing this because the work itself is rewarding. That's the opposite of what Motivation 2.0 assumes about human nature. Now consider the changing landscape of work itself. America now has over 18 million non-employer businesses, solo operations where people have no employees or boss managing them. We have 33.7 million Americans telecommuting at least one day monthly, with 14.7 million doing so every day. That's a massive chunk of the workforce operating completely outside of their manager's line of sight. Even traditional organizations are getting leaner and flatter. Organizations increasingly need to function like open source projects. Think about Linux, Wikipedia, or Firefox. Nobody manages these contributors, yet they work brilliantly. That's because routine jobs need direction, but interestingly, non-routine work depends on self-direction. So here's where we stand. Motivation 2.0 has critical compatibility problems with how modern work actually functions. It doesn't align with how contemporary business models organize work, contradicts 21st century economics, and clashes with the actual work many of us do now. Increasingly creative, interesting, and self-directed. These compatibility problems signal that something's fundamentally broken in our motivational operating system. To build something better, we need to understand exactly what those bugs are, and that's where our real journey begins. 2. 7 reasons carrots and sticks often don't work. He starts with something that he says might seem obvious. People need to earn a living. That's why I call salary benefits and basic perks baseline rewards. If these aren't adequate or fair, people will fixate on the unfairness rather than doing their best work. The real insight here is that money works best when it takes the money question off the table entirely, not when you use it as a dangling motivator. But here's where things get strange. Once you've handled baseline compensation in a fair way, carrots and sticks often backfire spectacularly. Rewards designed to boost motivation can actually dampen it. Tactics meant to increase creativity can reduce it. This is weird, and it doesn't happen in every situation, but it's remarkably consistent across cultures. Mark Twain understood this intuitively in Tom Sawyer. When Tom convinced his friends that whitewashing a fence was a privilege rather than a chore, he revealed something profound. Rewards can transform play into work. I call this the Sawyer effect. Edward Deci and his colleagues discovered this scientifically through elegant experiments with preschoolers. When children expected a reward for drawing, they later drew significantly less than children who received unexpected rewards or no rewards at all. A 1999 reanalysis of 128 studies confirmed it. Tangible rewards substantially undermine intrinsic motivation. What about performance itself? 4 economists tested this idea in India, offering participants varying rewards for games requiring motor skills, creativity, and concentration. Those offered the largest rewards performed the worst of all. The London School of Economics reached similar conclusions. Financial incentives can actually harm performance. In the early 1960s, psychologist Sam Glucksberg tested 2 groups solving the candle problem. Puzzle requiring creative thinking, where you're given a box of tacks and a candle, and you have to figure out how to attach it to the wall. He offered one group real money, $5, if they were in the fastest 25%, $20 if they were the fastest overall. The incentivized group took nearly 3.5 minutes longer to solve it. Rewards narrow our focus. They help when there's a clear path ahead, but they're terrible for challenges requiring creative breakthroughs. The creative breakthrough here was seeing the box as a candle holder instead of a holder of tacks. Harvard's Teresa Amabile studied professional artists and found that commissioned works created for payment were rated significantly less creative than non-commissioned pieces, despite equal technical skill. The artists themselves reported feeling more constrained on paid work. But here's what's truly paradoxical. A study following art students from the 60s into the 80s showed that those least motivated by extrinsic rewards early on achieved the most professional success years later. Scientists show the same pattern. MIT researchers compared 2 funding approaches. The National Research of Health emphasizes external controls and short review cycles. Howard Hughes Medical Institute tolerates early failure and gives researchers freedom. Howard Hughes investigators produced high-impact papers at significantly higher rates. So what are the critical problems with carrots and sticks? In a striking experiment from Israeli daycare centers, economists imposed a fine on parents picking up their children late. Late pickups actually doubled. Why? Because the fine transformed what was once a moral obligation into a simple transaction. Parents initially felt intrinsic motivation to be fair to their teachers. The fine crowded out that moral consideration, replacing it with a calculation. Can I buy extra time? There's also the addiction problem. When someone anticipates a reward, dopamine surges. That's the exact same physiological response triggered by cocaine. Offer your son money to take out the trash, and you've guaranteed he'll never do it for free again. Perhaps most insidious is short-term thinking. When we're focused on immediate rewards, we lose sight of long-term consequences. Companies obsessed with quarterly earnings neglect research and development to hit next quarter's numbers. This appeared everywhere in the 2008 financial crisis. That said, carrots and sticks aren't entirely useless. Rewards work reasonably well for one circumstance: routine tasks with obvious solutions. When Glucksberg presented the candle problem with the tax already emptied from the box, participants solved it faster when offered cash rewards. Key question is simple. Is this task routine, following a prescribed set of rules? For routine tasks, you can use if-then rewards. But even here, offer a rationale explaining why the task matters, acknowledging that it's boring, and allowing autonomy in how people complete it. But for creative work, don't announce bonuses for designs that rock your world. Instead, ensure baseline conditions are solid: fair compensation, a congenial workplace, and opportunities for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Use now that rewards instead of if-then rewards. Unexpected bonuses after completion. These preserve creativity because people don't see the reward as the reason they worked. Prefer non-tangible rewards like a specific praise and feedback, or a special lunch after they've done it, but not anticipated. Understanding this distinction might be the most important thing your business needs to know. 3. Type I and Type X. Let's go on a journey to Rochester, New York, an unlikely epicenter for a motivational revolution. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Edward Deci arrived at the University of Rochester with some genuinely heretical findings about rewards. His research challenged everything the business world believed about how to motivate people. When a graduate student named Richard Ryan joined him, their collaboration sparked something remarkable: self-determination theory. Self-determination theory rests on a powerful premise. Humans have 3 innate psychological needs: competence, the need to master something; autonomy, the need to direct your own life; and relatedness, the need to connect with others. When these needs are satisfied, we flourish. When they're thwarted, we collapse. But here's the crucial insight: we all possess this intrinsic drive within us. Whether it emerges depends entirely on whether our environment supports it. And here's the hard truth: Motivation 2.0's reward and punishment system actively stifles this drive. For 30 years, Deci and Ryan built a network of scholars across multiple continents. They conducted hundreds of studies spanning businesses, education, medicine, sports, and health. And their conclusion remained consistent: humans possess an innate drive toward autonomy, self-determination, and genuine connection. Now I want to introduce a framework that builds on their foundation, drawing from Maya Friedman's Type A and Type B thinking and Douglas McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. I'm introducing what I call Type I and Type X behavior. Type X behavior is driven by extrinsic devices. External rewards matter more than the inherent satisfaction of the world itself. Type I behavior is driven by intrinsic desires. The activity itself is what matters most. Here's what 30 years of research reveals. Type I people almost always outperform Type X people in the long run. Yes, Type X might produce short-term results through pressure and incentives, but when you're playing a long game, and life is a long game, Type I wins. And here's something crucial. Type I behavior is both innate and learnable. It's your default setting, but Type X can become Type I. It's not fixed. Type I doesn't reject money or recognition either. It simply relates to them differently. Once your pay meets a baseline of adequacy, Type I individuals shift their focus to the work itself. Money remains central for Type X people, but it becomes background noise for Type I. Type I behavior is also renewable. like solar energy versus coal. Doesn't create the destructive externalities that reward and punishment systems create. It doesn't escalate in cost. It sustains itself. The research is unequivocal. Intrinsically motivated people show higher self-esteem, better relationships, and greater overall well-being than those chasing type X validations like money and fame. So what fuels type I behavior? 3 things. Autonomy, the need to direct your own life and work. Mastery, the yearning to get better at something that matters. And purpose, the sense that what you're doing connects to something larger than yourself. Type I behavior is self-directed work, devoted to excellence, anchored by purpose. This isn't idealistic dreaming. It's not naive optimism. It's what modern science confirms about being human. And it's what succeeds in our rapidly changing world. Part 2, the 3 elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. 4. Autonomy. Daniel says, I've seen the future of work, and it's already here. It's happening in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in tech hubs across California, and in call centers being reinvented from the ground up. And you know what? It works because organizations are finally abandoning the old playbook of control and embracing something far more powerful: genuine autonomy. Let's look at Jeff Gunther's company, Medius, on a rainy Friday afternoon. Only a third of his 22 employees showed up to the office. Gunther wasn't worried. He wasn't even there until midday. Why? Because he knew his team wasn't slacking off. They were working on their own terms. At the start of the year, Gunther did something radical. He transformed Medius into an ROWE, a results-only work environment. It looks like the word row, ROWE. A concept developed by HR innovators Callie Ressler and Jody Thompson at Best Buy. The idea is really simple. There are no schedules, no mandatory office hours. Employees work when they want, where they want, and on what they want, as long as they deliver results. Those first 90 days, they were rough. People fell back into old patterns, showing up at 9, leaving at 5, but within weeks, productivity shot up, stress plummeted, and Gunther made it permanent. The skeptics asked the obvious question, how do you know what they're doing if they're not there? But Gunther understood something fundamental. Talented people don't need a leash. They need autonomy. This shift represents a generational change in thinking. Gunther's father's generation saw employees as resources, 2x4s needed to build a house. For Gunther, it's a partnership. Partners deserve the freedom to direct their own lives. Now, let's look at what autonomy looks like when you build it into the DNA of innovation. At Atlassian, they stumbled into something powerful with FedEx Days, 24-hour innovation sprints where engineers built something amazing overnight. But they saw the limitation. Brilliant ideas got shelved because there was no time to develop them. So in 2008, they decided to give developers 20% of their time, not just one intense day, but ongoing, to work on any project they wanted. This wasn't original thinking, though. Back in the 1930s, 3M's William McKnight believed in something revolutionary. Hire good people and leave them alone. This is the 1930s. He let his technical staff spend 15% of their time on whatever projects they choose. They called it the bootlegging policy because it felt subversive. That freedom produced Post-it notes. One scientist, Art Fry, developed the idea during his 15% time, not in assigned work. Today, Post-its are a 600-product empire spanning 100 countries. Most of 3M's enduring innovations came from those unsupervised experiments. He doesn't say it here in the book, but masking tape also came from one such experiment with an innovative employee who actually, he could only spend $99 without supervisor approval. So he placed many $99 orders to make a machine that put adhesive on the back of paper, because while they were a sandpaper company at the time, for everybody who was using the sandpaper in auto body shops, their biggest time-consuming process was taping up the cars with paper to mask off windows and chrome and such for painting them. So that was another one of these inventions that really launched 3M into becoming an adhesive company, and that was also done as a bootlegging effort. Google took this further. encouraging 1 day a week for side projects. More than half of Google's new offerings in a typical year emerged from that 20% time. Gmail, Google News, Google Translate, all born from employees choosing their own work. At Atlassian, their trial produced 48 new projects in a year. Yes, their CFO was horrified by the $1 million investment. Yes, project managers hated losing control. But they refused to let anyone track how engineers spent that time. That would defeat the purpose. The truth is, people work far more efficiently with autonomy than without it. But autonomy isn't just about when or what we work on. It's about how we work and with whom. At Zappos, customer service reps, typically trapped in soul-crushing monitored call centers, receive genuine autonomy over technique. One directive: serve the customer. No scripts, no call timing, no surveillance. The result? Minimal turnover and customer service rankings rivaling Apple and Ritz-Carlton. When you measure what matters, results, not hours, the outcomes are undeniable. Companies practicing ROWE show 35% productivity gains and voluntary turnover that's dramatically lower than traditional teams. Netflix built an empire on radical vacation policies. Take as much time off as you want, whenever you want, provided your work stays covered. Netflix doesn't count the days, and neither do their employees. Some progressive organizations are even experimenting with autonomy in team selection. Whole Foods employees vote on hiring decisions. Facebook engineers choose their teams. These aren't frivolous practices. Self-selected teams produce more satisfied employees. There's one caveat, though. The transition to autonomy requires scaffolding. Moving people directly from controlling environments into unrestricted freedom causes struggle. But this is what matters most. We're designed for autonomy. Throughout history, humanity has pushed relentlessly toward freedom. We're born to be players, not pawns. And when environments allow autonomy to flourish, people return to their natural state, engaged, creative, and unstoppable. 5. Mastery. You need not see what someone is doing. Let's start with a question that haunted him since he was a boy. In 1944, he was 10 years old, fleeing Hungary during World War II on a train with bullets ripping through the windows and bombs exploding in the distance. He remembers thinking, there has to be a better way to live than this. That question set him on a lifelong journey, one that eventually reshaped how he understood human motivation and fulfillment. Here's what he discovered. We've been approaching work all wrong. For most of the 20th century, what I call Motivation 2.0 worked fine. You could get compliance through carrots and sticks. People did routine tasks, followed orders, and went home. But the 21st century demands something different. Complex problem-solving requires engagement, not just compliance. Yet, look at the numbers. Over 50% of American workers aren't engaged. In some countries, as little as 2 or 3%. We're losing about $300 billion annually in productivity. After the war, he spent years searching for answers. He dropped out of school, worked odd jobs across Europe, and read everything about religion and philosophy. Then he discovered Carl Jung's work, pursued psychology, and eventually found what he was looking for. When he watched painters at work during his research, he noticed something extraordinary. They were completely absorbed. Time disappeared. Self-consciousness vanished. He called these moments autotelic, from the Greek words for self and goal. The activity itself was the reward. Eventually, he replaced that term with a simpler word that people used, flow. In flow, 3 things align perfectly. Goals are clear, feedback is immediate. Most importantly, the challenge sits exactly where it needs to be. Not too easy, not too hard, but just beyond your current abilities. This stretches you in a most satisfying way. When companies apply these principles, creating clear objectives, frequent feedback, and adjusted assignments to match skill levels, remarkable things happen. Green Cargo became profitable for the first time in 125 years. But here's what surprised him the most. The desire to master something new and engaging beats out every other motivator, including money. A study of 11,000 industrial scientists and engineers proved this decisively. Those driven by intellectual challenge filed significantly more patents than their financially motivated colleagues. The difference wasn't effort. It was where their minds were focused. The most successful organizations use 2 specific tactics to foster mastery. First, they create Goldilocks tasks, Challenges pitched perfectly between boredom and anxiety. Second, smart companies let employees reshape their work to inject flow into mundane duties. Research on hospital cleaners showed this beautifully. Some cleaners added extra tasks, chatting with patients, smoothing workflows that made their jobs more absorbing. They reframed their work and made it their own. But here's the crucial distinction. Flow happens in moments. Mastery unfolds over months, years, sometimes decades. Carol Dweck's research reveals that people hold either entity theories, intelligence is fixed, or incremental theories, it grows through effort. These beliefs shape everything. They determine which goals you pursue, how you respond to difficulty, whether you stick with challenges or retreat to easy wins. But mastery is an asymptote. You can get incredibly close, really, really close, but you'll never fully touch it. Paul Cézanne spent his entire life pursuing his artistic vision, approaching it from one angle, now from another, but never quite reaching it. His greatest works came late in life because he endlessly pursued what he couldn't fully attain. Great athletes understand this instinctively. They say they must improve whether they're just getting started or coming off their best season. Mastery will always hover just beyond grasp. Yes, it's frustrating, but there's something beautiful about it. The joy lives in the pursuit itself, not in some final arrival. People experience more flow at work than in leisure, when their work has clear goals, immediate feedback, and matched challenges. The tragedy is how we abandon this natural state. Children burst with flow experiences, probing their environment with joyful dedication. Then they get shamed for doing childish things and stop. Perhaps we're the immature ones. Left to their own devices, children inevitably seek flow like a natural law. That's the model we should follow. The answer I sought as a frightened boy fleeing war? Perhaps it was simply this. Find flow, make an ethic for living, and you found the way to live. 6. Purpose. We're standing at an unprecedented moment in human history, and it's all because of timing and math. When the baby boom generation started hitting 60 in 2006, something predictable happened, and then something more interesting followed. He's watched this play out in conversation after conversation across continents and cultures. Here's what happens at that milestone 60th birthday. First comes shock. How did I get to be 60? Then comes relief, because the statistics are genuinely remarkable. A healthy 60-year-old American man has 20-plus years ahead. Woman has nearly 25. In places like Japan, France, and Canada, reaching your 80s is basically the expectation, not the exception. But that relief doesn't last long. People do the math backward. They look at the previous 25 years back to when they were 35 and realize how fast it went. Then the urgent questions arrive. Will the next 25 years move just as quickly? When am I going to do something that matters? When will I make a difference? These aren't frivolous questions. They're happening at scale. The U.S. Census Bureau tells us there are about 78 million boomers in America alone. Every single day, more than 11,000 people hit this milestone. Every 13 minutes, 100 more enter this space. We're talking about the wealthiest, best-educated generation the world has ever known, all asking fundamental questions about meaning and significance at the same time. When this meets reality, we get what I call a thunderstorm of purpose. This reveals the missing leg of the motivational tripod. Autonomy and mastery matter enormously, but add purpose into the mix and you get something far more powerful. The deepest motivation comes from hitching your desires to something larger than yourself. Let's illustrate this with a study that drives it home. A researcher, Adam Grant, worked with university fundraisers and divided them into 3 groups. The first read stories about personal benefits, earning money, developing skills. The second read about scholarship recipients whose lives had been transformed by the funds they raised. And the control group read nothing. What's remarkable is this. The first group raised no more money than the control group. The second group, they raised more than twice as much money through twice as many pledges. Simple reminder of why their work mattered doubled their performance. This gets at something fundamental about how we run organizations. We're obsessed with the how, the mechanics, the procedures, but we rarely discuss the why. Yet, it's incredibly difficult to do something exceptionally well if you don't understand the deeper reason you're doing it. People at work are starving for this context, learning to know that what they do contributes to something larger than themselves. The old operating system dismissed purpose as optional decoration. That misses something fundamental about humanity. We've always been purpose seekers. Evolution seems to have selected for people with a sense of purpose beyond themselves. So here's what's fascinating about it, though. Businesses are waking up to it now. Worker disengagement is skyrocketing, yet volunteerism is rising equally as well. People are pouring energy into unpaid work that employers can't seem to purchase. Companies that stand for something, that pursue purpose maximization alongside profit maximization. They're discovering they can mobilize human energy in ways that pure compensation never could. Research from the University of Rochester followed graduates into their careers. Students with purpose goals, helping others, learning, growing, reported higher satisfaction and lower anxiety when they felt they were attaining those goals. But students with profit goals, wealth, fame, who actually achieved those goals, showed no increase in happiness and experienced more anxiety and depression. Even when they got what they wanted, it didn't make them better off. Some companies understand this. At the Mayo Clinic, for example, physicians who spent 1 day weekly on the most meaningful aspect of their work experienced half the burnout rate of their peers. Other organizations are letting employees personally decide which charities receive donations. These aren't peripheral benefits. They're central to how we motivate human beings. The paradox is this, though. Satisfaction depends not on just achieving goals, but on pursuing the right goals. And when people chase profit alone, they sacrifice the relationships, connections, and meaning that actually constitute a good life. Purpose isn't the decoration, it's the foundation. So, there's another section in the book that I'm not covering. You can find it in the book. It includes the following. It's certainly worth going through, but beyond the scope of this podcast. Part 3 is the Type I Toolkit. Type I for individuals, 9 strategies for awakening your motivation, and then Type I for organizations, 13 ways to improve your company, office, or group. The Zen of compensation, paying people the Type I way. And then Type I for parents and educators, 10 ideas for helping our kids. Lastly, he has the Type I reading list, 15 essential books. So well worth picking up a copy of the book. Here's my take on the book, and the reason that I thought this was appropriate to share with my audience, which is largely medtech leaders. Medtech leaders face a critical paradox. Their relentless focus on control and oversight, which is shown by the back-to-back meetings and sometimes even micromanagement, directly undermines the very performance they're trying to achieve. Pink's research shows that modern knowledge work, which dominates medtech, thrives on intrinsic motivation driven by autonomy, mastery, and purpose, not surveillance and command and control management. The science is unequivocal. When leaders attempt to maintain constant visibility and control, they inadvertently crowd out the intrinsic motivation that drives them to innovate and solve problems. To reclaim their time and unlock their team's full potential, leaders must embrace a fundamentally different operating system. This means delegating decision-making authority to their teams, trusting them to self-direct, and creating conditions where they can pursue mastery and connect their work to the larger purpose. By applying Pink's framework, ensuring autonomy, fostering mastery through clear feedback and appropriately challenging work, and articulating compelling purpose, leaders transform their role from bottleneck to enabler. One last thought here. The Keller-Williams approach of teaching teams to make independent decisions aligns perfectly with this science. It removes the leader as the constraint, multiplies organizational capacity, and gives leaders back the time they desperately need while improving outcomes. So that's my 2 cents. In the Keller-Williams approach, it's worth Googling that or use ChatGPT to ask what that approach is. When one of Keller-Williams' employees approached him and asked him what to do about this, he would say, "I hired you to decide what to do about that." So what he would do is he would encourage people to say, "This is how I'm planning to approach that. Do you have any comments or suggestions?" And the Keller-Williams approach would be to provide feedback on the approach they were planning to take. But what the Keller-Williams approach does not want is for the manager to make all the decisions. You really want to insist that the employees make their own decisions, and if they want to run it by you as a sounding board, that's perfectly fine. So that's my 2 cents. Remember that our website is www.innoguide.net, where we have many resources for innovators, including those who want to leverage system-level thinking to get their timelines under control, those who want to leverage AI in their development process without adding risk, and those who want to build medical products that will support embedded machine learning now or in the future. Know that you'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years and has led teams, large and small, who've developed and delivered 66 medical products to market. I've also recently launched MedX, our medical executive discussion forum, where leaders gather every month to share insights about how to navigate medtech product development in the age of AI. Join using the MedX forum button on my LinkedIn page. I also want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I want to thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.